The barrel of the pistol was chrome-plated, a cheap, flashy piece of hardware that caught the neon light of the bar and twisted it into a glare of impending death. It was pointed directly at a 19-year-old girl named Lily. "You think your patch makes you a god, Frank?" The man holding the gun was screaming, spit flying from his lips, his eyes wide with a mixture of cocaine, adrenaline, and terrified rage. His name was Rance, a lieutenant in the Iron Vipers, a rival club that had been trying to push meth into the county for months. "You think you can just walk into my town and tell me where to sell?" Frank the Hammer Donovan, president of the local Hells Angels chapter, stood 6 feet away. He was a giant of a man, built like a slab of granite, but in this moment he was frozen. He had his hands up, palms open. Not in surrender, but in a desperate, silent plea. His cute, the leather vest bearing the death's head of the Hells Angels, creaked as his muscles locked up. "Rance, look at me," Frank growled, his voice low, a rumble of thunder before the strike. "You pull that trigger, there is nowhere on God's green earth you will be able to hide." "Put it down." "I'm not hiding." Rance laughed, a high, jagged sound. "I'm taking everything you love. Let's see how tough the great Hells Angels are when they're burying their daughters." Rance's finger tightened. The tendon in his forearm twitched. In the corner of the room, invisible to the screaming men, Jake Harmon watched. He sat in his wheelchair, a ghost in the machine of violence unfolding before him. The world slowed down. It always did for Jake when the adrenaline hit. He didn't see fear, he saw physics. He saw the angle of Rance's wrist, shaking, deviating 4 degrees to the left. He saw the distance to Lily, 6 feet, 2 inches. He saw the trajectory. The bullet wouldn't hit her head. Rance was flinching. It would hit her spine. Jake looked at his own legs. Useless. Dead weight. The broken boy of Sal's Roadhouse. Then he looked at his hands, resting on the rims of his wheelchair wheels. These are not useless. These were pistons. Calculation complete. Rance's knuckle turned white. Jake slammed his hands forward. 3 hours earlier, the thunder had rolled over the highway, threatening a storm that refused to break. Sal's Roadhouse was the kind of place that smelled of history, stale beer, cigarette smoke trapped in the wood paneling since 1980, and the heavy industrial scent of grease from the boots of the men who drank there. It was a sanctuary for the blue-collar, the tired, and the broken. Jake Harmon fit the broken description better than anyone. At 23 years old, Jake had the face of a man who had seen the end of the world and survived, only to wish he hadn't. He sat in his usual spot, the corner booth where the shadows were deepest, his wheelchair angled so he could see the door. It was a habit, a survival instinct from a life he could no longer lead. Before the accident, Jake had been a mechanic. Prodigy, really. He could listen to an idling V-twin engine and tell you a valve was loose in the rear cylinder. He understood how things worked. He understood force, friction, torque, and velocity. He had planned to open his own shop, marry his high school sweetheart, and live a life of grease and glory. Then came the Tuesday morning, the red light, the drunk driver, and the crushing sound of metal folding like paper. Now Jake was the cripple in the corner. He traced the rim of his cold coffee cup, his fingernails black with grease, not from working on engines, but from greasing the axles of his chair. It was the only maintenance he did anymore. "Refill, Jake." Sal, the owner, stood over him with a pot of coffee. Sal was a good man, one of the few who didn't use that high, pitying voice people reserved for children and the disabled. "I'm good, Sal," Jake said, his voice raspy. He hadn't spoken much in 2 years. "Thanks." "Quiet night," Sal muttered, wiping the table. "Though I hear thunder. Might get rowdy if the rain starts." Jake nodded, looking out the window at the dark highway. He felt disconnected, like a ghost haunting the living. The accident had taken his legs, yes, but it had taken something else too, his agency. The feeling that he could affect the world. Now he was just an observer. A piece of furniture that people walked around carefully. The door banged open, bringing a gust of humid air and the roar of engines cutting off in the lot outside. The atmosphere in the bar shifted instantly. The air grew heavier, charged with a specific kind of electricity. Heavy boots thumped on the wooden floorboards. Leather creaked. A group of 7 men walked in. They moved with the confidence of apex predators entering a grazing field. On their backs, the death's head, winged skull grinned at the room. Hell's Angels. Jake stiffened. He knew the stories. Everyone did. You didn't mess with angels. You didn't stare. You didn't ask questions. But as they filed in, Jake noticed something unusual. In the center of the phalanx of hardened bikers was a girl. She looked to be about 20, maybe a few years younger than Jake. She had red-brown hair pulled back in a bandana, and she was wearing a denim jacket that was 2 sizes too big for her. She was laughing, looking up at the massive man beside her, President clearly by the President patch on his chest. This was Frank Donovan. Jake recognized him from the local news and the hushed whispers of the town. Frank was a legend, a man who supposedly controlled the entire tri-state corridor. But right now, looking at the girl, his face was soft. The hard lines of his jaw were relaxed. He had a heavy arm around her shoulder, forming a protective cage. "Daddy, I'm telling you, I can handle a bike myself," the girl was saying, her voice cutting through the low hum of the bar. "Not until you master the clutch, Lily," Frank boomed, a laugh rumbling in his chest. "You pop a wheelie and flip my Sportster, your mother will haunt me from the grave." They sat at the bar, taking up the center stools. The other angels flanked them, creating a wall of leather and denim. It was a display of power, but also of love. Jake watched them, unable to look away. He saw the way Frank checked the room, his eyes scanning every face before settling on his daughter. It was the kind of love Jake remembered from his own father, before the cancer took him. The kind of love that said, "I will burn this world to ash to keep you safe." Jake felt a pang of jealousy, so sharp it almost hurt. He looked down at his dead legs. He would never be that strong. He would never protect anyone again. The piece lasted for 20 minutes. The jukebox was playing Simple Man by Skinnerd, and the angels were laughing, drinking beers and eating peanuts. Lily was trying to steal sips of her father's beer, and the terrifying bikers were acting like indulgent uncles. Then the door opened again. This time, there was no gust of wind, just a sudden drop in temperature. 3 men walked in. They were younger warrior, with a desperate, hungry look in their eyes. They wore cuts that identified them as Iron Vipers. Jake knew the Vipers. They were a feeder club, a group of rejects and wannabes who tried to earn respect through brutality because they couldn't earn it through honor. They were dangerous because they had everything to prove. The music didn't stop, but the conversation did. The Hells Angels at the bar went silent. They didn't turn around, but their postures changed. Shoulders squared. Feet shifted for leverage. The relaxed uncles became soldiers in a heartbeat. The Vipers walked straight to the bar, ignoring the empty tables. The leader, Rant, stopped 3 feet behind Frank. "Long way from the clubhouse, Donovan," Rant sneered. Frank turned his stool slowly. He didn't stand up. He didn't need to. "It's a free country, Rance. Unless you bought the deed to this bar while I wasn't looking. We're taking over this run," Rance said, his hand drifting to his belt. "We told you. No angels in the valley." "And we told you," Frank said, his voice bored, "that lions don't ask sheep where they can walk. Go home, boy, before you get hurt." One of the other angels, a man with a braided beard named Grip, chuckled. Rance's face flushed red. He looked around the room, desperate to regain face. His eyes landed on Lily. She was staring at him, eyes wide, a peanut halfway to her mouth. She looked innocent, out of place in this clash of monsters. Rance smirked. A cruel, ugly expression. "Cute kid," he said. "Does she know her daddy is washed up? Does she know he's going to get her hurt?" Frank stood up. The sound of his stool scraping the floor was like a gunshot. "You speak about her again, and I will take your tongue. Or maybe," Rance continued, stepping back and raising his voice, "maybe she needs a real man, someone who isn't afraid of the future." He looked Lily up and down, a look of pure violation. "Come here, sweetheart. Let me show you what a real biker looks like." That was the line. Frank moved. He didn't wind up. He just fired a right cross that moved faster than a man his size should have been capable of. It connected with the jaw of the Viper next to Rance. There was a sickening crack, and the man folded like laundry. Chaos erupted. The bar exploded into motion. Chairs flew. Bottles shattered. The Hells Angels swarmed the Vipers, but the Vipers were scrappy and armed. Jake watched from the corner, his heart hammering against his ribs. He saw Lily scramble backward, away from the bar, her eyes filled with terror. She was trying to get to the door, but the fight blocked her path. Frank was fighting 2 men, his fists like sledgehammers, but he was losing sight of his daughter in the melee. Then Rance, bleeding from a cut above his eye, stumbled back. He reached into his waistband. No! Jake screamed, but his voice was lost in the noise. Rance pulled the chrome pistol. He didn't aim at Frank. He aimed at the one thing that would destroy Frank. He aimed at Lily. The bar went silent as the gun appeared. The fighting froze. Back off. Rance screamed. Back the hell off. He leveled the gun at Lily, who was pressed against the jukebox, sobbing. This brought them to the moment. The barrel. The wheel. The math. Jake Harmon sat in the corner. He was 10 feet away from Rance, 12 feet from Lily. He saw Rance's finger tightening. Force equals mass x acceleration. Jake's wheelchair was a heavy, old hospital model. Steel frame. It weighed 40 pounds. Jake weighed 160. 200 pounds of mess. If he pushed now, he would hit Rance. No, Rance was too far. If he pushed now, he could hit Lily. The logic seemed insane. Tackle the victim? But Jake saw the line. Rance was aiming center mass. If Jake hit Lily low, driving her to the floor, the bullet would pass through the space she used to occupy. It was a gamble. A suicide run. If he missed, he was just a disabled kid rolling into a gunfight. If he was slow, she died. But Jake didn't feel like a cripple anymore. He felt like a mechanic seeing a machine about to fail, knowing he had the only wrench that could fix it. Go. Jake gripped the wheels. His biceps, overdeveloped from 2 years of dragging his dead body around the world, bulged. He screamed, raw primal sound, and threw his weight forward. He thrust the wheels with everything he had. The chair didn't roll, it launched. The rubber tires squealed on the sticky, beer-soaked floor. The chair fishtailed slightly, but Jake corrected it with a violent jerk of his left hand. He was a missile of steel and flesh. Rance heard the squeal. He started to turn his head. D. Rance shrieked and pulled the trigger. Bang. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. At the exact same millisecond, Jake Harmon slammed into Lily's legs. He hit her with the force of a linebacker. The wheelchair tipped, spilling him out, and his shoulder drove into her thighs. She buckled instantly, falling backward. Jake threw his arms around her waist, dragging her down with him, twisting his body to shield her. They hit the floor in a tangle of limbs and steel. Jake felt his elbow crack against the hardwood, a blinding white flash of pain. Thwack crunch. The bullet, traveling at 1,200 feet per second, occupied the space where Lily's chest had been a fraction of a second earlier. It slammed into the glass front of the jukebox. The song Simple Man died in a shower of sparks and shattered glass. Silence. Absolute, ringing silence. Jake lay on the floor, gasping for air. He was draped over the girl, his dead legs twisted awkwardly under the overturned wheelchair. He waited for the pain of a bullet. He waited for the darkness. Instead, he felt trembling. Lily was shaking beneath him. She was alive. You missed, a voice said. It was Frank. And it sounded like the voice of death itself. Jake looked up. Rance was standing there, the gun smoking, his eyes wide with disbelief. He looked at the gun, then at the empty space where the girl should have been dead. He didn't get a chance to fire again. Frank Donovan moved. It wasn't a fight anymore. It was an execution. He crossed the distance in one stride and backhanded Rance so hard that Rance's feet left the floor. The gun clattered away. The other angels descended. It was brutal, efficient, and final. The Vipers were dragged out the back door into the alley. The sounds that followed were wet and heavy, the sounds of debts being paid in blood. Frank didn't join them. He dropped to his knees beside the overturned wheelchair. Lily. Frank's voice was broken, a whisper of panic. Baby. Lily pushed Jake off her gently and sat up. She was covered in beer and sawdust, shaking violently, but she was whole. I'm okay. Daddy, I'm okay. She looked at Jake. Jake was trying to push himself up, but his elbow was screaming in agony. His wheelchair was on its side, one was spinning lazily in the air. He felt exposed, pathetic. A turtle on its back. I'm sorry, Jake stammered, his face burning. I had to knock her down. The angle, the bullet. Lily didn't speak. She crawled through the glass and threw her arms around Jake's neck. She buried her face in his shoulder and sobbed, holding on to him like he was the only solid thing in the universe. "You saved me," she wept. "You saved me." Frank Donovan watched them. His chest was heaving. He looked at the bullet hole in the jukebox. He looked at his weeping daughter. Then he looked at the man in the wheelchair, the man with the withered legs and the grease-stained hands. Frank reached out. His hands, the size of catcher's mitts, gently grabbed Jake's shoulders. He lifted Jake up as easily as if he were a child and set him upright. He righted the wheelchair and placed Jake back in it. Then Frank Donovan, president of the Hells Angels, got down on one knee. He was eye level with Jake. "What is your name, son?" Frank asked. "Jake," he whispered. "Jake Harmon." Frank nodded slowly. He took Jake's hand in his own. "Jake Harmon, you saw what was coming. You moved when everyone else was frozen. You put your body between a bullet and my blood." The other angels were coming back inside now, wiping their knuckles. They saw their president kneeling. They went silent. "Listen to me," Frank said, his voice rising so the whole room could hear. "This man, this warrior, just gave me my life back. He is under my protection. From this day until the end of days." Frank squeezed Jake's hand until the bones groaned. "You have a family now, Jake. You understand? You are never alone again." 3 days later, Jake was sitting in his apartment. The adrenaline had faded, replaced by the crushing weight of his reality. The local news had run the story. Disabled hero saves biker's daughter, but Jake didn't watch it. He didn't feel like a hero. He looked at his elbow, now wrapped in an ACE bandage. It throbbed. He was back in his small, quiet world. The ramps, the grab bars, the loneliness. The moment at the bar felt like a fever dream. Maybe the angels had forgotten him. Why wouldn't they? He wasn't one of them. He was just a mechanic who couldn't walk. He rolled to the window and looked out at the suburban street. It was a Tuesday, the same day of the week his accident had happened. He was about to close the blinds and go to sleep when he felt it. Vibration. It started in the floorboards. Then the window pane began to rattle. Then the coffee in his mug started to ripple, creating concentric circles. It sounded like a storm, but deep, rhythmic, and mechanical. Rumble. Rumble. Roar. Jake frowned. He wheeled closer to the glass. At the end of the street, a black shape turned the corner. Then another. Then 10. Then 50. The sound grew until it was a physical force, pressing against Jake's chest. The entire neighborhood seemed to shake. Motorcycles. Hundreds of them. They were pouring into his street like a river of chrome and steel. It wasn't just Hell's Angels. Jake saw patches he had only read about. Mongols. Outlaws. Bandidos. Rivals who would usually kill each other on sight were riding side by side, united by a code that transcended club politics. Honor. Jake's jaw dropped. The line of bikes stretched back as far as he could see. They filled the road, the sidewalks, the driveways. 1,600 bikers. They came to a halt outside his apartment building. The silence that followed the cutting of 1,600 engines was more deafening than the noise. Jake opened his front door. His hands were shaking. He rolled out onto the small concrete porch. The sea of bikers looked up at him. Tough men. Scarred men. Men who scared society to death. And many of them were crying. Frank Donovan stood at the front, right at the base of Jake's ramp. Lily was beside him. She looked different now, stronger. She was wearing a new leather vest. "We told you, Jake," Frank shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. "We take care of our own." A cheer went up from the crowd. It was a roar of approval, of respect. "Jake, Jake, Jake." Frank walked up the ramp. He didn't look like a gang leader today. He looked like a father. He wiped a tear from his cheek, unashamed. "My brothers heard what you did," Frank said, gesturing to the army of bikers. They came from 3 states away. They wanted to meet the man who had the guts to do what needed doing. I don't know what to say," Jake stammered. "Don't say anything," Frank smiled. "Just ride." Frank whistled. The crowd parted. 2 prospects pushed a machine forward. Jake gasped. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. It was a custom-built trike, but low-slung, aggressive, painted a deep midnight black with ghost flames. The tank gleamed in the sun. On the side of the tank, airbrushed in incredible detail, was a phoenix rising from the fire. But it was the controls that made Jake's heart stop. There were no foot pegs, no foot brake, no shifter by the foot. It was all on the handlebars. A hydraulic paddle shifter on the left grip, a link braking system on the right lever, a custom bucket seat designed to hold a paraplegic rider securely, with straps hidden in the leather. We built it, Frank said softly. Me and the boys. Pulled an all-nighter for 3 days straight. It's got an SS-124 engine. It's fast, Jake. Scared shitless fast. Lily stepped forward. She placed a hand on Jake's knee. You gave me my life back, Jake. We wanted to give you yours back. Jake looked at the bike. He looked at the handlebars. He remembered the feeling of wind, the feeling of speed, the feeling of control. Is it? Jake swallowed hard. Is it for me? It's yours, brother, Frank said. Keys are in it. Getting on the bike was a production, but nobody rushed him. Frank and Grip lifted Jake out of his chair. They didn't treat him like he was fragile. They handled him with the respect one gives to a loaded weapon. They strapped him in. Jake gripped the handlebars. The rubber felt warm. The ergonomics were perfect. His mechanic's brain recognized the brilliance of the engineering instantly. Hit the starter, Frank commanded. Jake pressed the button. The engine roared to life. It was a deep, guttural bark that vibrated through the seat, through his spine, and settled right in his chest. It was the heartbeat he had been missing for 2 years. Frank mounted his own bike. Lily hopped on the back of her father's motorcycle, wrapping her arms around him, but she kept her eyes on Jake, smiling. Lead the way, Jake, Frank yelled over the noise. Me? Jake asked. You're the hero, Frank grinned. Hero leads the pack. Jake twisted the throttle. The custom trike surged forward. He rolled off the curb and onto the street. He didn't wobble. The trike was stable, planted, powerful. He tapped the paddle shifter, clicked, and hit second gear. The wind hit his face. It wasn't just air. It was freedom. It smelled of gasoline and cut grass in the future. Jake accelerated. Behind him, 1,600 motorcycles roared in unison. It sounded like the earth cracking open. They rode through the town. People came out of their houses to watch. They saw the Hells Angels, the Mongols, the outlaws, a terrifying armada of leather and steel. But at the front of them all, they saw a boy with dead legs on a black phoenix, leading them like a king. Jake looked in his mirror. He saw the endless line of headlights. He saw the brotherhood. For the first time since the accident, Jake Harmon didn't think about what he had lost. He didn't think about the red light or the drunk driver. He didn't think about the wheelchair sitting empty on his porch. He felt the engine scream. He felt the road under his wheels. He calculated the curve ahead, radius, speed, angle of entry. Perfect geometry. Jake threw his head back and laughed, the sound swallowed by the thunder of the engines. He wasn't the broken boy in the corner anymore. He was fire. He was speed. He was alive. And he was riding into a sunset that finally, after 2 long years of darkness, promised a tomorrow.